Some 30,000 years ago, at the height of the Ice Age, when much of the world's water was frozen in continental ice sheets,
Barents Sea, as a result, was hundreds of meters below its current level. A land bridge known as Beringia emerged between Asia and North America, a highly diverse and productive environment with a megafaunal ecosystem materialized around it. It attracted animals that early humans hunted for their survival. Here comes the theories, man. Models of chronology of migration into the Americas are divided into two general approaches. There's the short chronology theory, which states that the first migration occurred after the Last Glacial Maximum, which declined after about 19,000 years, and followed by massive waves of successive immigrants. The second one is the long chronology theory. It proposes that the first group of people entered the Americas at a much earlier date, possibly before 40,000 years ago, followed by a much later second wave of immigrants. The first people entering Alaska would take thousands of years to work their way down the south to what is now known as the United States. There are a lot of evidence of early life in North America indicating that life was probably well established in much of the Western Hemisphere by some time before 12,000 BC. The earliest identified human craps in America we found in Paisley Caves in Oregon. The Clovis culture appeared around 12,000 BC at the present-day Clovis, New Mexico. The Clovis people used distinctive bone and ivory tools. They are considered to be the ancestors of most of the indigenous peoples of Americas. Mammoths began to die out, and bison became the principal source of food and hides of these early Americans. By 8000 BC, corn, squash, and beans were perhaps cultivated in the South. Nuts, seeds, and shellfish were exploited for subsistence. Agricultural practices appeared by then. San Dieguito Pinto tradition and Chihuahua tradition in California and Mexico, the Penutian-speaking peoples, the Aleuts, and the Oshara peoples in New Mexico were some of the traditions and peoples that flourished in the Americas before 5000 BC. The hunter-gatherer societies built monumental earthwork mound complexes as early as 3500 BC at Watson Brake, Louisiana. This is older than the Egyptian pyramids or England's Stonehenge. By 3000 BC, early signs of irrigations appeared, and by 300 BC, village life. In the modern state of Ohio at around 800 BC, the Adania culture emerged. These people shared a burial complex and ceremonial system. They built earthen burials and fortifications at around 600 BC. The Hohokams built pyramid-like mounds at Arizona, reminiscent of those found in Mexico, in the 1st century AD. The Adania culture was then displaced by the Hopewell culture that flourished in settlements along the rivers in the northeastern and midwestern parts of the United States and Canada from 100 BCE to 500 CE. Hopewellians, too, disappeared, and a group of tribes known as the Mississippians emerged at around 800 CE. They were known for building large earthen platform mounds. The largest city was Cahokia, believed to be a major religious center, located in what is present-day southern Illinois. 20,000 people have been estimated to have lived in the city. They evolved into complex hierarchical societies, which took slaves and practiced human sacrifices. A sister culture of the Mississippians, the Fort Ancient culture flourished in 1000 AD. The Anasazi of the ancestral Puebloans, ancestors of the modern Hopi Indians, emerged at around 700 AD. They began building pit houses and adobe pueblo complexes. The most famous one is the Cliff Palace, Mesa Verde National Park, Colorado. The Americas that welcomed the first Europeans were thus far from being an empty wilderness. It is estimated that as many people lived in Western Hemisphere as in Western Europe at that time. From the Europeans' initial contact with the indigenous peoples, epidemics of smallpox, typhus, influenza, and measles killed between 10 million and 100 million people, which is like 95% of the indigenous populations of the Americas. Smallpox killed more Indian population in the 1600s than the numerous wars with the European settlers did. Norwegian explorers were the first known Europeans to set foot on what is now North America. Eric the Red, traveling west of Greenland, had founded a settlement around the year 985 CE. His son Leif Erikson was the first known European to have set foot on continental North America in 1001 CE, approximately 500 years before Columbus. According to the sagas of Icelanders, he established a Norse settlement at Vinland. In 1963, remains of Norse houses were discovered at Lands O'Meadows, Newfoundland, Canada. It is the only confirmed Norse site in or near North America outside of the settlements found in Greenland. A Spanish expedition headed by the Italian explorer Christopher Columbus sailed west to find a new trade route to India, but inadvertently landed in what came to be known to Europeans as the New World. He landed on 12 October 1492 on Guanahani in the Bahamas. Columbus never saw the mainland United States. The rest is history. 5 years later, after Columbus landed on the Caribbean, John Cabot arrived at Newfoundland on a mission for the British King Henry VII. This is the earliest known European exploration of coastal North America since the Norse visits to Vinland in the 11th century, and also a basis for British claims to North America. The explorations of the continental United States were launched from the Spanish possessions Columbus helped establish. The first one was the exploration of Florida by the conquistador Juan Ponce de Leon in 1513. Mexico was conquered in 1522 by the Spanish, which solidified their position in the Western Hemisphere. The Italian merchant Amerigo Vespucci published booklets containing colorful descriptions of his explorations of the New World. The term America is derived from his name. Several discoveries of the New World added knowledge of the Americas to the Europeans. By 1529, reliable maps of the Atlantic coastline had been drawn up. Hernando de Soto led the first European expedition deep into the territory of the modern-day United States, through Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and most likely Arkansas. Giovanni da Verrazzano, in 1524, explored the northern parts of the United States. He explored North Carolina, sailed along the Atlantic coast, and passed New York Harbor. 10 years later, Jacques Cartier, a Frenchman, became the first European to map the St. Lawrence River that laid the foundation for the French claims to North America. Francisco Coronado is searched for the mythical 7 cities of gold in 1540, reached the Grand Canyon, which is in Colorado and Kansas. He failed to get his gold and treasure. He did, however, leave a remarkable gift to the Plain Indians: horses that transformed life on the Great Plain. The Spanish leader Pedro Menendez established the first permanent European settlement in which would become the United States at St. Augustine in Florida. Spanish soldiers under the conquistador Francisco Pizarro conquered the Inca Empire of Peru in 1572. The British had been looting Dutch ships returning from India and elsewhere. Under Francis Drake, English raiders looted Spanish treasure ships. He was a hero to the English, but his piracy led the Spanish King Philip II to offer reward for his capture, 6 million in modern currency. The English had seen the profit made in the trade across the waters. In 1578, Humphrey Gilbert received a patent from Elizabeth to colonize the heathen and barbarous lands in the New World. He failed. 5 years later, Walter Raleigh took up the mission. In 1585, he established the first British colony in America on Roanoke Island in North Carolina. It was also a failure. The colony was abandoned. The immigration turned from a few hundred to a flood of millions in the late 16th and early 17th century. They arrived in overcrowded ships in a 6 to 12-week voyage of 5,000 kilometers across the ocean with meager ration. The first British colony to succeed in North America was Jamestown, Virginia, which was established in 1607. John Smith, the leader, tried his best to hold the colony together in its first year. There were attacks from the neighboring Indians. There were diseases and starvations and fights. John left for England in 1609, and during his absence, the colony descended into chaos. 60 of the original 300 settlers survived by 1610. Virginia's economy did not develop for a long time. However, after John Rolfe began crossbreeding West Indies tobacco with the native plants, it produced a taste pleasing to the European tongues. This tobacco trade across the Atlantic became the chief source of revenue for Virginia. The Puritans were English Protestants in the 16th and 17th centuries who sought to purify the Church of England of Roman Catholic practices, maintaining that the Church of England had not been fully reformed or should become more Protestant. The reformist ideas threatened to undermine the royal authority and divide people. The group of separatists departed for Holland, where the Dutch gave them asylum, but they were confined to low-paid laboring jobs. They became dissatisfied, and 101 people, including women and children, departed for the New World in 1620. After many storms and delays, Mayflower landed in Cape Cod in New England in the winter. The men drafted a formal agreement to abide by just and equal laws, drafted by the leaders of their choosing, in which each member would contribute to the safety and welfare of the planned settlement. This was the Mayflower Agreement. Half of the colonists died shortly. Another new wave of immigrants arrived on the shores of Massachusetts in 1630. The Massachusetts Bay Colony came into being. It had a rigid orthodoxy of the Puritan rule, which was not to everyone's liking. A young clergyman, Roger Williams, was the first to openly object to the colony's seizure of Indian lands. Williams was expelled by the Puritan leaders from the Massachusetts Bay Colony for spreading new and dangerous ideas, and he later established the Providence Plantations, Rhode Island, in 1636. This was the first colony in America where complete separation of church and state, as well as freedom of religion, was practiced. On his final expedition, while still searching for the Northwest Passage to India, Henry Hudson, hired by the Dutch East India Company, became the first European to see Hudson Strait and the immense Hudson Bay in 1609. The first interest of the Dutch settlers was in fur trade. Dutch were in close relationship with the Five Nations of the Iroquois. In 1624, the island of Manhattan was purchased from the local Indians for a reported price of $24. It was then called New Amsterdam. To encourage settlers to come to the Hudson area, the Dutch set up the patroon system. By 1640, the British had solid colonies along the New England coast and Chesapeake Bay. There were Dutch and Swedish communities along. The West was still home to the original Americans, the Indians. The first Indian uprising was in 1622 in Virginia, where some 347 whites were killed. Pequot War followed in 1636 as local tribes tried to prevent settlement of the Connecticut River region. The colonial authorities classified them as extinct, and the survivors were absorbed into the local tribes. There's the Phillips War in 1675. The war was the greatest calamity in 17th century New England, and is considered by many to be the deadliest war in colonial American history. The indigenous Confederacy of Iroquois formed the most democratic nation of its time in 1570 by accepting 5 tribes under Haudenosaunee, or League of the Iroquois. They were more successful in resisting European advances. To make up for the weak defense measures, the Massachusetts Bay, Plymouth, Connecticut, and New Haven colonies formed the New England Confederation in May 1643. This was the first European attempt at regional unity. The first revolt against the royal colonial authority, known as Bacon's Rebellion, broke out in 1675. New proprietary colonies were established in New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and South Carolina. William Penn in 1681 received a large tract of land west of Delaware River from his friend King Charles II. It became to be known as Pennsylvania, or Penn's Woods. He recruited a number of religious dissenters: Quakers, Mennonites, Amish, and Baptists. When Penn arrived in 1682, there were Dutch, Swedish, and English settlers living along the Delaware River. It became to be known as the City of Brotherly Love, or Philadelphia. Few colonists could finance the cost of passage for themselves to start a new life in the new land. Ships' captains received large rewards for the sale of service contracts for the poor migrants called indentured servants. Every method from extravagant promises to actual kidnapping was used to take on as many passengers as their vessels could carry. In some other cases, the expenses of transportation and maintenance was paid by colonizing agencies such as the Virginia or Massachusetts Bay companies. In return, indentured servants agreed to work for the agencies as contract labor for 4 to 7 years. Free at the end of the term, they would be given freedom dues, including a small tract of land. Between 1/2 and 2/3 of the European immigrants to the American colonies between the 1630s and American Revolution came under indentures. There was one exception to this pattern, however: African slaves. The first blacks were brought to Virginia in 1619. Initially, they were regarded as indentured servants who could earn their freedoms like all other indentured servants. By 1660s, the demands for plantation workers in southern colonies grew. The institution of slavery began to cement around the indentured blacks, and the Africans who were brought to America were in chains to indenture of a lifetime. Indenture actually means a formal agreement, contract, or list. Slaves were imprisoned in a factory while awaiting shipment. Current estimates are that about 12 million to 12.8 million Africans were shipped across the Atlantic over a span of 400 years. It is estimated that more than half of the entire slave trade took place during the 18th century, with the British, Portuguese, and French being the main carriers of 9 out of 10 slaves abducted in Africa. At the time, slave trading was regarded as crucial to Europe's maritime economy. The profits from the slave trade contributed to the financing of Britain's Industrial Revolution. Now look at all the glitter of the world. And again, look at all the hate. The simple fact is that no people can enslave another for 4 centuries without coming out with a notion of superiority. And when the color of the other physical traits of those peoples were quite different, it was inevitable that the prejudice should take a racist form. To support the creator of this video, visit www.buymecoffee.com/Chongtham